The session is now being recorded. I'm delighted to be welcoming Matthew to the session. You all right there, Matthew? Slightly grey in
Oh,
St Albans for you?
yes, yeah, very grey, very miserable. And like I've seen some of the comments, it's nice to be inside in the warmth, if possible. And
Absolutely.
yeah, it's lovely to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
No problem. And anybody who's come to these sessions on a regular basis knows we love to start with a question. So
Mm.
you have a question for our audience, Matthew?
Yeah, and like Andrew was saying, put them in the chat box. But it's something I've been thinking about, and it's what is something that you're really excited about for the next 12 months of L&D, and very very kind of aware that the title is Trends and Transformations for 2025, but I think it's we're now into February, and that just absolutely surprises me. The year is flying by already. I've already had the birthday of my 3-year-old son. It's just the next stop is Christmas for me. So yeah, what are some of the things you're really looking forward to and excited about for the next 12 months? And
And I can see people already putting some responses in the box. And it's like,
mm,
okay, so I've opened a large chat box for people who are new to this. We've opened, when we ask a question of the audience, we put a big chat box up there and we say, please do tell us. And I can see we've got people putting in holidays in the other box. But we've got people highlighting in the main box. So just having a look at some of the responses here. I,
mm,
the elephant in the room, AI. Everyone's talking about
yeah.
AI, using more AI, etc., etc. We'll come back to AI potentially. I'm going to look at some of the other responses though. So we've got micro learning,
Mm.
which is interesting.
And I
Um,
think
uh, so go
yeah, I
ahead.
mean, AI is obviously, sorry, Andrew, AI is going to be the hottest topic of the foreseeable, I feel. Retaining creativity without AI, I think is that there's that kind of consistent looming dread of AI, and at the same time, the excitement of it. And I'm very excited and I love using AI. And of course, we'll talk about AI today, but there's far more to the learner toolkit than just AI. And it's how are we using it? How are we encouraging people to experiment with it? And it's nice to see, the kind of the try, true, and tested, micro learnings and nano learnings, and exploring new technology and skills assessment. And I
Mm.
think what we'll find throughout the course of this is, whilst they're foundational in shaping our future, it's essentially picking and choosing the right tools for the right job at the right time.
Absolutely, and Jade's before you even said that, Jade Mountain, I love this comment, Jade. I think that's fabulous. Avoid AI washing, only using it when it's supercharged innovation or offers new ways to operate. I love that comment, Jade.
Mm.
It's considering it and using it as a tool. It's a tool for you to use. Interesting having a look at skills assessment is coming up there. I love Joe in the other box has said using in time nudges. I'm a big fan
Mm.
of that as well. Consultative, says Simon. It's not all just AI. I
No.
like it's the there's excitement around other things as well, which I think is really important, and that was reflected in. I know you're going to touch on this on Donald Taylor's global sentiment survey as well.
Yeah, and I think what and I guess to answer my own question, which anyone at Omniplex Learning would laugh about. I tend to like to answer my own questions, but I think I'm very excited just about just the possibilities of the L&D industry at the minute. We've got a lot of tools at our disposal, and sometimes we can forget about the simplest forms of communicating a message to our learners. And at the same time,
Mm.
talk about human-centered learning, and it's still about putting our learner front and center and just creating the tool that works for them at that moment in time. And I'll mention just in time learning, and just in versus just in case, and learning in the flow of work. And essentially what we're trying to do is create a seamless experience for our learners within let's be honest, within the constraints of time and resource. Are we giving them
Yeah.
the time to learn as well? And I think that's something to consider as well as we go throughout this session.
Fabulous. I'm
But
going to close that box down. I'm going to close that box down, Matthew. Just explain to
yeah, no, of
everybody. So
course.
there we are. We've gone to our normal presenting mode. We've got the space there for you to put your questions in. I'm going to hand over to you now, Matthew. I'll come back on in a
No,
few
lovely.
moments when we've got questions and stuff. If anybody has any queries, please do put them into the chat. But please do continue the comments in the chat. I'm loving the conversation with everybody this morning. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, no, thanks so much everybody for just sharing those sentiments about what we're excited about in terms of L&D in the next 12 months. And I think, when I look back at my own experiences from not just, I entered L&D in 2018 from an educational field. I was a secondary school teacher. And I was thinking about this recently about what we mean by kind of aligning to, and we'll talk about this in particular in the next coming few slides. It's about identifying data, return of investment, the right metrics to achieve the right outcomes. And I think there's two parts to this. There's the side of my learner as a stakeholder, but also at the same time my organization as a stakeholder. And it's about balancing the gap between the two. And I've like I mentioned, worked in the L&D industry since 2018, so I still feel like I'm relatively new. And I remember the AI conversation coming up about chatbots and what could that possibly pose for the industry. And from this and from my experiences of working at Omniplex Learning with so many different clients across so many different sectors, and going out and doing face-to-face training with some clients as well in the last year, to going and talking at a KPMG roundtable event about the future of learning in L&D and being exposed to the entire spectrum of L&D, that's always a fascinating thing to be a part of. And I always encourage people to just immerse themselves in the world of L&D to really truly find what excites you as an individual, but also everybody. And it's lovely to be here this morning. I'm going to try my best not to talk too much, which again, anyone at Omniplex Learning knows I like to talk too much, so I do apologise for that. But I'm here to act as a peer. I'm not here to act as an expert. I'm just here to share my insights and be a part of this really exciting community. And it's so lovely to see 206 people so far joining us this morning. And I think, it's going to be a really fun conversation. And sort of off the back of that, I've kind of been looking into a little bit of educational psychology or psychology in general, just about the entire philosophy of the human race. So, an easy morning question to answer, and it's the punctuated equilibrium of learning. And I mentioned on the post this morning on my drive into work, this is like my multiverse theory of learning. We go through one timeline and a big event occurs. And in this instance, we had the pandemic of 2020, and we find ourselves shifting into a new structure of, well, how do we adapt? How do we change? How do we work on something different? And then we go forward 2 more years or 3 more years, and artificial intelligence is becoming a big thing. We shift again our new approach about, what does our new reality look like? And again, without nerding out and without being a fan of Marvel or whatever that might be, I've come up with this kind of like this multiverse theory of L&D and, the endless possibilities of what that could achieve. And I think, if we're on the timeline that we are in a minute, where AI is dominating everything, we can forget about the stuff that worked before, the stuff that worked in the past, such as micro learning and nano learning, and about mobile-centric learning. And essentially, it's about understanding what it is we want to achieve and what it is as individuals, but also as an organization we want to achieve as well. And there's a couple of statistics I just want to read out. Is from the WEF Global Risk Report that 63% of business leaders highlight turbulent times ahead. And this is a report from last year. And based off of that, there's a thriving in the age of continuous reinvention from PwC. 45% of CEOs believe that their company will not be economically viable in the future due to kind of the change and the shift in global sentiment surrounding learning and surrounding, how we're kind of adapting. And I believe those turbulent times are already here. And like we mentioned at the top, there's this punctuated equilibrium where we're constantly having to evolve, we're constantly having to reinvent ourselves and adapt. And I think it's about, the aim for this is about where do we want to be in the future? What do we want to achieve? What tools do we want to use? And again, I don't have all the answers at all. And hopefully I'm going to learn as well, just from any questions and comments from the community that's here this morning, about what we could do to achieve that. So I have a kind of a question that I would like you to think about, and we're going to come back to this one right at the end. This is my very last slide, but what is it you want to continue building on 2025 and beyond? And as we go through these slides and these other conversations, have a think about this question. What is it you want to continue building on in 2025 and beyond? And I've, just as an example, my answer here is understanding the functionality of LMS systems far more greater in order to achieve a true outcome. That's something that is a kind of a personal goal of mine. And I think, we're not going to be the experts in absolutely everything. But to me, it's kind of looking at what we can do to get our community invested in learning a little bit more as well. So have a think about that question as we come back to this at the end. If you've been active on LinkedIn as well, you'd have noticed that the GSS has been announced for 2025 from Donald Taylor, and no surprises there. And I'm not going to spend too long on this slide because there'll be a lot of communication about this on LinkedIn. But artificial intelligence is dominating the top of that. We're constantly asking, how are we using it? What is it being used for? But no one's asking, well, why are we using it? And what is it we want to achieve from using it? And I think that's something that we need to really reflect on ourselves. Are we using it just for the sake of creating more content? And there's that whole devaluation of content through artificial intelligence. And should we be using it to allow our learners to access learning far more efficiently? All the way through to what I've highlighted as 5, 6, and 7, the strategic alignment with organisation is showing bounce back ability. A word that I hadn't heard since Soccer AM in the early, I don't know, late 90s, 2000s, but this possibility that value is having bounce back ability. It's coming back into the fray. It's being far more, at the forefront of organisations moving forward. And looking further down, and this is what I love to see, the micro learning and the nano learning and the cohort-based learning and the experience of people. It's that expanding learner toolkit is a core feature of why we're here and what we're looking to achieve in L&D moving forward as well. But again, you've got the Global Sentiment Survey. You can download that on Donald Taylor's website. So the link is there. Just and we can sort of send that out, but it's very easily accessible. And I recommend reading that report because it does give us some insight into what we're expecting in the next 12 months. And this is kind of some consolidated client feedback. So if you haven't noticed at the minute, we're just setting the scene. From the last 12 months of working with clients, we're talking here about optimization of LMS. And what I did here is I took all of my notes, all of my ramblings, all of my just random bits of paper and Word documents that I had, and I kind of funneled it through my Notebook LM just to kind of like pull some of that key information out. And this is how I'm using AI, just as an offset. But that people are looking at optimization of LMS. They're looking to drive a learning culture shift and campaign-based approach. And I'd like to kind of ask the question here is, and again, open this up to the chat, so please feel free to put this in the comments, but how many of these do you recognize on your own internal kind of initiatives? Are there any that stand out for you that are surprising, or are there any there that make you feel kind of like a sense of, okay, this is what the L&D sentiment is at the moment? And I think, it'd be nice to kind of just discuss these 8 in a little bit.
I'm just going to just give people an opportunity to have a look at these 8. Which of these ones really connect with you? I think is interesting. Which are the ones that you're hearing in your workplace? Stick them in the general chat if you can do, rather than the question box for me. Put them into the general chat there. I work with loads of different organisations. I hear loads of different comments all the time. So I've probably heard all of these 8 in one way or another with different organisations. But I know at least half of them says shall. Learner experiences, Louise, measuring ROI. Learner experience with mandatory training, Ruth. That's a really interesting one. The mandatory stuff. I'm chairing a session at Learning Technologies on compliance. I'm really interested to see what that looks like. Learning in the flow, says Kate, but need to shift culture too. I think the two are completely aligned, Kate. It's how do you shift that culture? If there isn't a culture of learning in the flow of work, how do you shift that? Which I think is interesting. Any stand out for you, Matthew? Any of the comments coming through particularly?
So to me, learning culture, I think, is a massive one. I think if you address learning culture, then you can significantly enhance that keyword return of investment. I think, without kind of pinpointing that culture of giving people the time to learn and making it a part of their day-to-day practice, you're not going to embed that culture. And if we're just then creating contents, and Andrew, you and I spoke about this a couple of days ago, and I've heard the word 3 times in the last 2 weeks, sprint design, doing it quickly, just churning the content, then we're not addressing a culture. We're just going, right, we need to get this done quickly. And I understand, I come from a very great, lucky position of working at a third-party provider where we have such skill sets to kind of create and shape learning, and internal L&D is so tricky. I understand that. But it's about And again, I'm going to cite reference a couple of times throughout this course. I worked with London Business School. So Jade, I know you're a part of that, and also Thomas, or you as well. We talked about sponsors and getting people to kind of like just take a risk with something new, a new approach that the L&D initiative want to achieve, and seeing the success thrive from that. And I think that is what is then going to, measure and demonstrate a new ROI for people. And I think that then enhances the culture of learning.
Awesome. There's a question from Rosemary. What is campaign-based learning?
I'm so glad there's been an interest in campaign-based learning. So campaign-based initiatives is something that I'm really, we're looking to really drive at Omniplex Learning as a means of getting that buy-in about allowing the learners to understand the why. And I will go into a little bit more detail towards the tail end of this session, but it's essentially creating an experience that is far more than just a moment of learning. It's about getting people excited, engaged, understanding their own why, but also reinforcing that with nudges and reminders. And it's essentially a little toolkit of learning about a particular topic. And we've done that recently with compliance training, and more than happy to reach out and answer any questions sort of towards the end about how compliance links to all of this as well. But it is essentially you don't just release a film and expect people to go and watch it and enjoy it. You have to create the messaging around it to get people really excited about the buy-in as well. Awesome. That's my short sum.
Brilliant stuff. If people still want to continue this in the chat, please put them in there. I am having great fun trying to hoik the questions out from the question box. But yeah, please do continue the chat in the chat box. Matthew, back to you.
Thank you. So just with this in mind as well, I think if we kind of have a look about, and we've finally got down to, and I'm going to use that word, the learning objectives of the day. So what are we going to be exploring? And again, essentially, considering what we've just looked at, we're looking at the evolving relationship within L&D and stakeholders, whether that's learning culture, how we demonstrate ROI. And again, we don't have necessarily the full kind of answers to every single one of those questions, but we're looking at that evolving relationship, how we move beyond just content in pursuit of impact and value. And then finally, we're looking at that expanding learning toolkit for just in time and learning in the flow of work. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail as we go through. But I wanted to sort of start us off with a visionary leadership why visionary leadership fails, from a Harvard Business Review article from I think last week or a couple of weeks ago. And it's visionary leadership does not just set a strategic direction. It tells a story of the why and why the change is worth pursuing. And I kind of wanted to kind of lead with this one, because when we talk about organizational strategy, we talk about the key messaging coming from the top. Our C-suite are driving that message about learning, about culture, direction, what is it we want to achieve. L&D needs to do the same thing. We need to open up that communication, and we need to be held accountable, and also praise and support and celebrate everything that we're trying to do. Not only do we need to get the buy-in from the people that are doing the learning, but we also need to get buy-in from the people at the top as well. And this is how we start addressing that shift with stakeholder management. And I think you can even talk about, stakeholders not just being, the higher ups, the seniors, the C-suite level. It's also our learners. They are our stakeholders. They are the people that are doing this. And it's about getting that why. It's about addressing that why question. And I think that, Simon Sinek always says, start with the why. And, I've always been a firm believer of that when I was in secondary education. Well, why are we doing this? Why am I having to mark books every single week? Why? And then when we start answering those questions, we can start moving towards a final goal. And kind of off the back of that, mastering the digital shift, which is, again, a piece of research that Omniplex Learning put out last year, sort of towards the tail end of last year. When we look at these two charts, and if any of this information is a bit too small, you can expand the window. Sort of in the top right corner, there should be a go full screen, so you can see this in a bit clearer detail. But there is still kind of like this need for alignment with regards to L&D strategy with digital transformation programs. And when the chart on the right I find really fascinating. What would you say the role of L&D is within your organization? It's upskilling employees to take on new tasks and roles. That is a key feature, and that's been a big key feature about global sentiment surveys and learning reports over the last 2 or 3 years about reskilling and upskilling. But at the same time, there's this whole need for training employees to do their current job. That's 26%. But if we look further down that list, improving departmental performance, and that's where we're looking at ROI, that's still only 13%. And I can guarantee you, a lot of people would say, departmental in performance and improvement and showing that return of investment is such a high priority. But I would always question how many people are actually doing that, or are we still just churning out content for content's sake? And I think, we will send this report out, and it's very much an interesting read in terms of, how are people using AI and how are people using kind of like the toolkit at our disposal to really drive learning culture. And from this, when we're trying to think about stakeholder management, there's this really interesting kind of look about 5 elements of learning service value. And, whether it's from the operating model all the way down to creating an evidence-based learning, it's identifying how we essentially can provide that value in order to get a seat at the table. And if we're looking at that second column along, stakeholder relationships, there's a depth and range of relationships. It's not just management, senior leaders, C-suite level. It's our learners as well, like I mentioned before. And if we're not getting that intrinsic buy-in from kind of up and down the horizontal spectrum, then we're still falling short. And it's what can we do with influence and agenda setting? And I saw a really interesting comment there about, learning influencers, getting people to promote learning, getting people to champion learning, I think is a key feature of it. Whether that is, someone at your, whether it's your chief learning officer or someone in your C-suite level or someone on a senior leadership team, just promoting learning as a cultural change. I think that's where the messaging happens. That's where you can really drive that change, because otherwise L&D will still sit quite segmented. And that then moves down the line to looking to solution set. And again, part of my job as an instructional designer is, and working with an amazing team is, yes, there are trends. Yes, there are tools at our disposal, but it's still about using the right one at the right time. And whether that's a RISE build or a storyline build, or it's a PDF or a PowerPoint or an animation, there's lots of things at our disposal for us to use. But we should also be mindful of the fact of, how long does it take, and, what is it being used for? And kind of all those basic things that we know is, in the L&D industry is kind of key. Because I think at the end of the day, it's if you can get people championing you, I always find that word difficult, championing, then you're being set up for success. Whereas if you've got that constant pushback, and it goes back to what I was saying about, the work we've done, the conversations I've had with London Business School, getting people to act as sponsors can hopefully drive that change and that initiative, because you can promote, look at what we can do. We can actually do something different, rather than, someone sending you a 3-hour video of a lecture and going, turn this into e-learning content, because we were just geared to fail that way. And kind of just not kind of going into too much depth about this, but this is Laura Overton's kind of L&D value spectrum. And if you're looking at the chart at the top, we've got the learning value and the business value. And what we're looking to do is shift more to the right-hand side about demonstrating that business value. And of course, we can measure activity and efficiency and engagement and the usefulness of the learning. But essentially what we're looking to do is highlight performance, talent, and culture as well. And something that I love, and I remember this from education, I always forget the reference, but we need to start taking steps out of our comfort zone and start pushing ourselves toward that development and that learning zone about, well, how do we measure performance and how do we get that change of culture? And hopefully through, just sort of some of those conversations about, well, making sure that we kind of align with and get that buy-in from the seniority, then hopefully we can sort of shift that messaging and that narrative towards the right-hand side. And kind of just at the bottom left corner, to get it right, answer the why. Why are we doing this? And hopefully it's kind of, not just answering it with more content, but it's also about understanding the core problem and uncovering the business KPIs. And there's been a lot of conversations I've had recently with clients when they said, oh, Matt, so what does, when we're measuring return of investment, what does that mean for you? What does that look like? And I always freeze at that answer. And I think it's about us pushing back to the organization. Well, tell us, what's the metric you want to measure? Is it about increasing a percentage of sales? Is it about increasing revenue? L&D can't directly answer that question, but it can put in place the stones to get people confident to demonstrate that in a more practical way. So I'm going to hand it back over to you. I've done too much talking, sorry. But just thinking about, stakeholders shifting and the role within L&D, how has your role within L&D evolved in recent years?
I've opened up another chat box for everybody, and I'd love you in this in the chat box here. I can already see Andrew and Louise and Kate already typing in that box. If you can just in that large box, how has your role with LND evolved in recent years? I love the word that you've got, evolved rather than changed in there, Matthew, because it is an evolution. I think
I mean,
the nature of expectation has shifted. I think rather than just changing.
it is an evolution, I think, and again, I always mention it that I've only been in the N&D industry since 2018, and since then, like just not even that, since in the last 12 months, my role has evolved. Like it's evolving day by day, week by week. I don't know what to expect sometimes, but it is about kind of adapting to that evolution and just shifting our mindset and shifting about what it is we want to achieve. And it's nice to see some of the comments coming in here as well. Just having a look down the list.
Absolutely. Susan, more facilitating rather than delivering. I think that's a really interesting one. It's the sage on a stage, the person telling people how to do it rather than actually asking how we can do it better, I think is a really interesting one. Anthony, yeah, AI, it's in recently. Trying to get to the table earlier, Andrew, that's good. I think that there's something I've spoken about, moving from shopkeeper to engineer, which I think is important, which is being involved in the conversation early on is important. Any stand out for you from that list, Matthew?
Yeah, one that stood out actually. Catherine says down sort of, well, it's now halfway. But yeah, for me, designing especially e-learning design rather than delivery. I think that's quite a nice way because that word design is it's about sculpting something that you are proud of and that is going to show that value rather than delivery, which is just, well, let's just deliver it quickly. I think it's about time.
Yeah.
And also as well, kind of the focus on data and learning analytics. And I don't think I've got it in this deck essentially, but it's how do we shift away from vanity metrics and how do we encourage that as well about, well, it's not just about engagement or did the learner enjoy it, did they complete it, but it's about, the right tools to kind of demonstrate that value. And again, a couple of clients recently that I've kind of worked with, they're using Microsoft plugins to circumnavigate the LMS to show, and it's Power BI dashboards, to pull the data that the LMS is unable to achieve. And I think that's just such a weird thing to do. You've got an LMS. Why can't we kind of set up our LMSs to pull that data, to show those pathways? Why are we relying on essentially third-party software to circumnavigate things? It's interesting.
Yeah, it's something else that I've spoken about before. If 70% of users look at the first 4 minutes of a video, of a 7-minute video, is that because the video is good or is it because the video is bad? And we don't track. We just go, oh, they looked at the video, but actually how much of the video and how much of that impact on the other things they've learned, we're just not investigating that so much, which is interesting. Just having a look here, move and read and understand SOPs is Lisa. Shane, becoming more strategic. I think there is something to do with that strategic. Shane, I also think there's something more tactical in L&D as well. Simon, changed from asking what the business wanted to what the learner needed. I think
that's interesting.
Goes back to
what's the problem you're trying to solve?
Business consultant. Yeah, absolutely. And Magrier has gone more focused on learning experiences, and there is that experience around learning rather than just the delivery piece, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. I can see Ray and a couple of others are still typing. I'll give you a moment or two just to add, and then I'll close that box down. Anything else that you wanted to pick up from that list?
Yeah, the one that's just popped in there, or the one above it, omni-channel learning experiences. I think that's something that I'll touch upon sort of towards the end, and just create. And I'm a theory being theories for theory's sake. I'm a big fan of a connected experience and creating lots of different avenues of access. I think for learners to, and essentially creating a kind of a web of learning and allowing and championing that word again, championing learners to really take hold of their own learning kind of pathways, I think is key. Rather than just pushing learning onto people, we should be pulling them along for that journey and kind of encouraging that kind of growth mindset.
Fabulous. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to close that window down. Thank you, everybody. Again, on the recording, you can come back and you can look and see what other people have added to it as well. So strongly recommend doing that and actually having a look and seeing what ideas other people are taking forward, which is always something we can do in the recording. Fabulous. Matthew, back to you.
Thank you. So sort of moving on, I think there's just a couple of things that we can kind of consider, and I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. I really want to kind of get to the end of this presentation with enough time to kind of open up the room again to answer questions and answers, because there have been so many interesting questions that have filtered through that we can come back to. But it's about kind of, and again, just getting our seat at the table. It's about how do we kind of create these collaborative experiences for people, and it's not just collaboration within our internal L&D team, but it's also collaboration with the seniority to get and show that, you know, that we've got far more to offer than just churning out content, that we can start sculpting and shaping and designing an experience where learners feel, you know, that need to want to learn more. And I think, you know, I'm a big fan of sponsorships in, you know, when you're trying to drive a new initiative, and we've done that internally at Omniplex Learning recently with compliance training, and we've rolled this out, and I'm going to go back to the, you know, this campaign approach that we're trying to really drive. And again, you know, I've been pushing for marketing to drive this one, but let's redefine e-learning as event learning, essentially. So the E now is event. It's, you know, it's about creating those experiences for people that make it far more than just, oh, okay, so we've got to do this compliance training. Oh, we've got, you know, some soft skills stuff in order for me to progress to the next level. It's, you know, just celebrating that in its kind of like grander scheme. And sort of moving on, sort of like looking at content creation is not a value-added activity. And Egle is, you know, from October last year, and she's doing so much research with Donald Taylor about AI and kind of like, you know, the benefits of AI as well, of kind of, you know, what do we want to achieve? And if anyone can do it, you know, then why is that such a big kind of thing? Instead, we should be moving up that strategy value chain. You know, the time that we can use to kind of create content, let's start thinking strategically. I think that's a really interesting position as well. And that's what's been the driving factor of, you know, using kind of learning to demonstrate value. I think it's far more than just kind of creating more content. And some interesting research from Fosway last year. And again, they did a 5-week publication, Digital Learning Realities for 2024, and it's all around, and we look at the top 3 there. Mobilizing around strategic organizational priorities, innovative learning approaches, and measuring impact and value add to performance and productivity. And, you know, even the top 5, learning the workflow as well is key, but it's about, you know, being innovative with learning, and kind of, rather than relying on, you know, what we were doing 3 years ago and scrambling for digital learning, it's that we're now looking again at blended experiences and creating a kind of a connected experience of learning, whether it's, like I mentioned, podcasts, PDFs, a Rise build, a storyline build, whatever that might be or might look like. It's that, you know, we shouldn't just be creating digital learning for digital learning's sake. We've probably got content out there that's probably just as, you know, effective as, you know, as it needs to be, but could we kind of maybe shape it or dress it or communicate that a bit better as well? And again, that links back to some research that we've conducted sort of internally. So current challenges that your organization faces. And again, budget constraints, lack of time for individuals to learn and train are the key factors. And we can create the best content in the world, but if we're not giving people the time to learn and time to engage in it, then it's not going to be effective either, you know. And I think back to my, you know, the evolution of my role. I came into the industry going, right, I want to create these amazing courses where people have fun, and it's got gamification in it, and it's got, you know, points and badges and you know, all of that stuff that's tied to those very kind of, I'm not a fan of gamification, but all of those aspects that are tied to these kind of very shallow sentiments. It's still being driven around this whole idea of kind of time and retention, and, you know, the best tool for the best job. And again, just a couple of respondents sort of highlighting that time resource model being a kind of a big factor of why things fail sometimes. And especially when, you know, we're looking at the industry, and we haven't got enough time to go into it today, but we're looking at, you know, budget. You know, L&D budgets are the first, obviously, to sometimes be cut and to be slashed and to be affected. And sometimes we can't avoid that, but we can start thinking, you know, going back to the basics, simply about kind of, you know, the content creation that we can do. And again, just moving sort of back to kind of that shift from learning value to business value. Learning trends along the bottom there, you know, we can talk about learning pathways and data and the soft and human skills aspect of learning through to campaign. But, you know, I've started to call them tactics, because I think, you know, we've got this idea that, you know, and I liken it to a game of chess. You know, each piece has its own unique move. It's got its own unique outcome, and what is it we want to achieve? Well, essentially, in chess, you want to achieve, God, this is me just stumbling on chess because, obviously I play chess every single day of my life. And no, I don't. I've played it like once. But so I'm going to make a fool of myself now. But it is essentially that we want to make checkmate and that we want to win the game. But in order to do that, we need to use each of our individual pieces uniquely in order to line up with the business value of a strategic metric alignment. What is that return of investment? What does it look like? How do we make our organization future ready? And again, back to the punctuated equilibrium model of how things shift and change and adapt. We need to be ready for that, and we need to look at the tools of our disposal. And then finally, kind of that learning culture and mindset, I think, is such a big thing, because if you don't have that buy-in from people, then you're not going to have the support. And we need support. We need support from seniority in the C-suite level as well. And I'm very, very grateful that that we do get that support here. And that's something that we want to try and help people with, is get that buy-in, get that support, and show the value of learning. So I'm going to pass it back to you. What is the biggest challenge that you're currently facing in implementing effective learning initiatives?
I really like this question because I think I'm really keen to see what people say. Is it because I hear loads of reasons, and I'm really interested. I'm not going to suggest what it is. I'm going to wait and see what people say. Stick your answers in that big box underneath. I can see some going in the other. India said time constraints. Shower said IT infrastructure inertia. Gillian, that floats my boat. That one does. Change cycle, resistance to new messages. We've got budgets. We've got attitudes towards learning. Lack of support for learning. Everything else is a priority, Kate. Yeah, been there, bought the t-shirt on that one. SME's availability, says Annalisa. That's an interesting one, Annalisa. Yeah, it's the availability of the SME to feed into it. It's how we can use them. Alignment with supply chain functions. A lack of alignment. Again, we talk about alignment. We talk about integration. What's good learning? Inconsistency. Line management, promoting support. It seems lots of things. It's not one thing, is it?
No,
Matthew, it seems to be lots of different things.
It's not what some of them are what I expected. Obviously, time and budget, but there's a nice one there, because I always find this one. It's LMS restrictions and learner attitudes as well.
Yeah.
And I saw a comment from Amy in the general chat. Can you suggest ways to inspire that buy-in? And I think the buy-in is something that we do struggle with in terms of kind of like implementing effective learning attitudes. And I'll go back to and Andrew again, Trojan mice, which is a conversation and a word that I'd only heard of from you the other day when we were talking. Just implementing small sort of like incremental kind of steps on that journey, and essentially, and Amy and lots of others in the kind of that kind of in the kind of the chat. It's the buy-in is a big challenge, and I think what is nice is if you can kind of find somebody within your organization that's got they want to show and they want to work with something different to really stand out. I think that's really key. And a kind of an example that we've used internally, so Omniplex Learning, we have to do compliance training like everybody else. But we know that the compliance training, cybersecurity training isn't the most exciting of trends. So we created this event learning where for example, we staged a cybersecurity attack on our CEO, and he had kind of the full support of us doing this on a live call with the entire organization, where it was scripted, and it created this event. And a lot of that inspiration was taken from kind of my own love of kind of immersive cinema. Big fan of secret cinema, and just creating experiences where people are immersed in an environment to then kind of like trigger this interest. Oh, what's going on? What's this about? And I think, if you can get that, and you can do a little bit of kind of like data collection surrounding it, and you can make it a case study, that is then your gateway to get the buy-in. Look at this, see how different it is. Look how much it worked. And we've got the data, and I'm sure we can share that at some point. But from this kind of event learning experience, we had a 96% engagement rate, which kind of not just demonstrated off of an LMS, but people were engaged with it on Teams, through our social channels. But yeah, there's so much in terms of a challenge, but I think that buy-in one is a key one, because if you can address that buy-in part about looking at sponsors and doing your case study surrounding a piece of a lovely piece of learning, then you can essentially kind of then start looking at shifting towards working close with subject matter experts, because they're going to be more invested in it, through to possibility of you know creating learning calendars and actually starting to structure that learning experience for learners, rather than going, here's a 3-hour module, off you go. Actually create calendars for people as well is possibility of a way of looking at it too.
Awesome. I'm going to close that window down.
Lovely.
I can see a couple of people are still typing in there. I'll give you 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, and I'm going to close that window down, and let's go back to our presenting space. There we go.
Lovely. And
Excellent stuff.
amazing.
We've got 15 minutes left.
I've got to whistle through this last
let's
bit.
See how we, let's see how we churn through. Loving the conversation, everybody. Loving the comments.
And I think, this then moves on to kind of our next part, and I'm going to kind of tie these two parts together. So just content, we're not just creating content for content's sake. We can look at holistic solutions, but essentially I'm going to look at that box on the right. It's about identifying key learning needs analysis, looking at pain points, and then structuring things through an ontology, through like a web of kind of data, So I need to get from this part here in order to get over to here, but in order to get over to here, I need to achieve X, Y, and Z. And it's essentially creating an organizational structure of, well, what learning is, addressing which objective and KPI, and how are we going to measure that? And ontology is something, again, looking at things that I'm excited about exploring in the next 12 months. That's something that's key for me. But so, I'm going to kind of move on just because I want to get through to the kind of like more discussion at the end. But, a piece of research in 2019, for learning to really happen, it must fit in and around the working days and working lives. And again, it's about that culture shift. No longer can we expect people to kind of engage with learning. Oh, you're on a train journey home. You can listen to a podcast and you can do some digital learning then. Well, why would we expect people to do that? They're outside of working hours. They're on their way home. That's their time. We should be fitting learning into our everyday life at work. And again, kind of like looking at the digital realities from Fossway, learning campaigns are beginning to dominate that strategy. And again, looking at portals, LMSs. But the second one down is so key for me: learner marketing and engagement, and also campaign approaches. And campaign approaches tie in as well to learning nudges, because not only should we be creating that engagement and the learning, we should also be reminding people of the importance of it, and therefore driving that culture of kind of of nudge culture. And again, just kind of back to a theory, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. You do a piece of learning doesn't mean you understand it. It's about kind of that repetition of engagement as well throughout, just to show the value too. And there's nowadays there's a need for learning in the flow. We want people to be doing and be learning at the same time. And I think that comes from communications with your line managers. That comes with communication with your peers around you. We are learning every single day of our life, and just putting this deck together, I've learned far more about the industry than I had probably a month ago when I started doing all of this. And that's a nice thing to have too. But at the same time, it's about understanding, what is the industry saying, and kind of what can we do in order to address that. And again, just looking here, just sort of like the blended learning landscape, blended learning is becoming a key feature again. And 80% of learning is delivered digitally, but only 4% of organizations say that 100% of L&D is delivered digitally, whereas up to 55% are saying that over 80% or up to 80% is delivered digitally, but up to 50% is 41%. So blended learning is a big factor of it. And, we don't just want to kind of create a one size fits all model. It should be about the experience holistically. And if you look at the 70-20-10 model split of, 10% of learning should be formal learning, whereas the rest should be through kind of on the job experience, but also through communication. We want to be encouraging that kind of very, very, very horizontal means of access for learners to engage with that learning. Because again, we have a guide systems tool that we kind of build and structure narratives and campaigns around a systems learning piece that overlays over a functionality. For example, Salesforce. It's not, creating that system and creating that overlay for learners to learn from isn't just going to fix the problem. It's about, again, getting the buy-in from people and creating a campaign that's front and center. And again, this ties into the whole conversation about, does learning fit within the marketing side, or does it fit within a kind of a HR side as well? And what we want to achieve essentially is people just talking about learning. If people are talking about it, then it's effective too. And again, just sort of summarising that kind of that sentiment from Fosway from last year, that 50% of kind of the experience over the coming year is going to be a blended experience. No longer should it just be digital, but it should also be all face to face. It could be a multimodal delivery of like I mentioned, PDFs and podcasts and animations, and we should be encouraging that kind of more experiences. Means more good, in my opinion. With performance support also dominating that metric. What are we doing to support our learners in terms of their overall performance? Are we encouraging communication as much as we should? And this is something I kind of wanted to kind of end this section on in terms of just content, because I know there's been some interesting campaigns, and I know there's been some interest in what we mean by a connected experience. But in Learning Tech 2023, this was my first draft of a model about what I foresee a campaign model being like, and I called it a campaign of small wonders. And you can see right in the center, we've got a micro learning module at the moment of learning. And I always call it moment of learning because that's when we release the course. But on the lead up to that, we should be creating materials that just start to drip feed some of those keywords. And it could just be a poster or a PDF handout. It could be a 30-second animation or a video or a talking heads piece, just getting that kind of interest and starting to drip feed some of the could be key terminology, it could be key messaging, whatever that might be. But we do that and structure that in a way that kind of makes people familiar of the content before we then release that content. And I used to do this in education in secondary schools. Before you move on to a new topic, you'd do call it a baseline test if you like, but you start drip feeding that information through to people so that when you then launch it, they're aware of it, they're accepting of it, and they're willing to kind of like start absorbing that information more. And then that's followed up, by week or by month, by podcasts and nano modules and small videos. Again, just nudges to say to people, remember this thing you did? This is so important. Here's a case study, and let's look at it in a different way, and let's explore it in a different functionality. And you're either a fan of Bloom's taxonomy or you're not. But you can move up that Bloom's kind of threshold and start getting people to think differently about the learning content that they're digesting, rather than just did they pass, did they fail? Because that is again some of the ways that we can address that cultural shift too. So I guess and I know we've got 8 minutes left, so we're going to we'll do this question, and then we can come back to the kind of the little summary question and do some Q&A in the last 5 minutes.
Let's just do a very quick one in the large chat box that's there. So how prepared is your organisation? So, I don't know, fully, mostly, partly, not at all. Katie, NHS is always slow. I've been doing some work with the NHS. I've had 3 sessions with different groups in the NHS this week, looking at strategic workforce planning, and the culture there is trying to work around on the workforce planning is really challenging. Be happy to have a chat about that. Partly trying to get there, partly not really. Lots of work without access to PCs, says Kate. That's an interesting one. Do they carry mobile phones, Kate? And is there something around mobile phone use? Did a really interesting piece with some bin men, about 15 years ago, using mobile phones. Practically, says Tracy. Partly, says Sarah. Silo working is making it challenging, says Annalisa. Yeah, it's everybody wants something different. And not really prepared. IT mostly, says Bill. That's nice. If you could, in the larger chat, Bill, just say why you think you're mostly prepared for it. What is it you've done to get to that point? If you can put that in the other chat box, that'd be really handy. Work in restricted areas, Rosemary, not great. Again, NHS. There's other issues around that within the NHS. Ray saying still exploring. We're using this approach on a new initiative, which I think is interesting. It's always a just-in-time approach with something new is a good way to do it. I'm planning on hosting micro. Could do much more in this area, recognises Judith, and mindset is as important as digital. Well done, Amanda. Absolutely. It's people recognising that you can learn in lots of places, lots of times, and it doesn't have to be in a classroom. A long way to go if you're an HE, Simon. Absolutely, FE and HE is really challenging. Users prefer this, but stakeholders are not considered their needs. That's a really interesting point, Susan. I think that there's a lot of value in that. And it's a focus, but can be like herding cats, says Ben. I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. Thank you for your responses on that one. We're going to move on. And again, we'll pick those up in the recording if you want to go back through. Interesting to see how that looks in the future. I'll move us back on.
Yeah. And just, yeah, so we can kind of close up as well, because I'm so aware of time. And again, that's another area for development for myself over the next 12 months. It's, can we explore AI? Can we explore that connected model of campaigns to kind of like start looking at how we deliver just in time and learning in the flow? Can we give people and again, we've worked with clients, trackside rail workers that need that learning at that moment in time. And again, mobile technology was very, right for that moment, but also they needed the training for people in the office. So it's exploring the right tools for the right job again, and seeing what we can do to achieve that. But just to sort of like bring everything to a close, the dilemma is that we hate change and love it at the same time. And what we want is things to remain the same but get better. And I think that's the sentiment that I feel that we all kind of like agree to and support. But we want to start moving towards that business model, but there's still a long way to go, and there's no right answer. And I hear it from every client from different sectors that, what can we do to make this learning? And it comes back to the word engaging. And, I'm always mindful of that word, but we should always be celebrating the learning that we create. But driving the messaging behind it, I think, is the key one, so that we can really sort of like start moving towards that business value. And, here's some things that we can do now. It's redefining e-learning, and I called it event learning before, looking at the way in which we can structure things, talking to our learners. I don't think we do that enough. I know that I would love to speak to some learners of organizations I work with and find out really what it is that they like and what it is that works for them, through to examining the actual business strategy. Where is it they want to go in 5-10 years, and what can we do in the L&D industry to show that benefit and that demonstration of value, through to adapting the future of work. We're far more, we're remote now. We're not just in the office, and it's about adapting to kind of like the blending line between work and learning. I think is key as well, especially when we're looking at the bottom one about creating that culture of learning shift. And again, sorry for whistling through the 5 things that we can do right now, because I just wanted to end on this and just kind of answer some questions in the last 4 minutes. But yeah, feel free to chuck into your chat, what is it that you want to work on, and what is it that you want to start addressing straight away after this webinar? Is there anything that you can go and just talk to somebody about and experiment with? And I think that's key. I always find it when I go to a webinar, it's something I'm going to try or look into more. But thank you very much.
Awesome stuff. Well done for getting us through to the end there. I want to pick up a couple of questions. There was 2 or 3 questions that I picked up, and please continue putting in your comments. There was a question quite early on. Where was it gone? Elizabeth Houston. Leveraging learning influences is an interesting one. What are people doing to promote this within organisation? What are your thoughts on that, Matthew? How do we leverage learning influencers?
So something that I'm actually working on with a client at the minute, and I'm not going to go into the details of the subject matter at all, but there are people on these teams and there are people within the organisation that are really promoting a use case, for example, and I think what it is, it's about utilizing these people to create, and it's not just talking head videos, it could be podcasts, but experiences, sharing experiences, and using people who are influential within your organization to promote that messaging. And if you've got a key message from a key stakeholder in your organization to drive that, I think that's an influencer. I'm not talking here social influencers, but at the same time, you look at a lot of, the trends on TikTok and social media nowadays. It's about people influencing that change culture. And I think that's something that we could use is to drive that, I guess, learning marketing, essentially.
Yeah. Excellent. I've got other questions, but we've got 1 minute and 7 seconds left. So we're going to run out of time, everybody. A massive thank you to Matthew for the session. Really enjoyable. You can see it in the comments. I mean, there's people saying thank you and the comments coming through. There is Omniplex have produced an ebook, Mastering the Digital Shift. Click on the link that's in there, and that will take you to it. You've got Matthew's contact details and mine, although why you'd want to connect with me, I have no idea. The recording will be available on Monday, and the link to future webinars. And if you look in the resources section on that left-hand side, there's the clickable links about learning change makers, the WEF, etc., and links to the elements that were highlighted within the session as well. Again, like we say, the recording will be available from tomorrow. strongly recommend go back and just, what did someone say and what did people say, and you can go back through and just have a look at some of the questions in the chat and connect with people through the chat comments. If you've seen people and you go, oh, that's really interesting, I'd like to connect, then please do, and that's how we build this community stuff. Awesome session, Matthew. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to stick everybody back into the waiting room again, but thank you again, Matthew. Thank you for everybody here for joining in, and we'll see you next month. Take care, everybody, now. And I'll stop recording.